Hello BookTube and hello AuthorTube. I want to do a response video in this video to something that I saw from Cam at the channel that is now called Cam Wolf is Writing. I'll leave a link to his video down below. It just appeared in my feed today. Cam is a veteran of our little corner of BookTube. He doesn't brand his channel as BookTube anymore, but he still makes videos on bookish and writing content. And he and I are old buddies. He's been over here to Hyde Cottage for wine and calzones many, many times. Actually, no, he hasn't, because he hates me, because I smell. But I figure we've been BookTube comrades for quite some time, and who better than a longtime BookTube comrade to slap around a little. So his video is titled, "Is Wanting a Writing Career Enough?" And it's very thoughtful, it's very well done, very inviting, as all of his videos are. I urge you to go and watch it, and subscribe, if you're not subscribed, in which he talks about the path to a writing career. He himself is a self-published author, and says in the course of this video that he would ideally, he's not shooting too high, he's not shooting for the moon, ideally he would like to make the same amount of money from writing that he currently makes from his non-writing, non-creative job. He's not asking to be a multi-squillionaire. He wants the ability to replace one with the other, and just have his career be writing. And wonders in the course of his video whether or not wanting that is sufficient. This got me thinking, because I've known a great many writers in my life at all stages of success. And that made me think that I had a horse in the race to talk about this subject. And before I talk about the subject, I promise I won't make a long video, but before I talk about the subject, I want to propose my own bona fides for why I would bother to talk about it at all, why you should even listen to me. One of them is the aforementioned thing, which is that I have known writers in every stage of struggle. From people who didn't know that they were writers, I had to teach them that, to people who did know that they were writers, but had not the first idea about what to do or how to do it, where I was there at the other end of the phone. I was there across the table at the library. I was there to help out and to see the struggles up close and personal. I've also seen some of those authors break out and become successful, and in a few cases, mega successful. So I've seen that spectrum firsthand myself. I think that gives me a horse in the race when it comes to this subject matter. And the other half of my bona fides is something that I don't think is shared by many people on AuthorTube, which is that I actually do make my living writing. I don't write fiction. I'm sure that I'm less talented a fiction writer than Cam is. But if I stopped writing, I would stop making any money. I make all of my money from writing. I happen to be a critic and a book section editor, so it's not the same thing. I'm not crafting stories the way Cam is talking about in this video, but I think that gives me enough bona fides at least to sit at the table and talk about this and reflect on what I have seen on the subject of the question, is wanting a writing career enough? And the thing that I want to stress here, I want to break things down into threes, okay? Because these things break down into threes. And the first batch of threes is what kind of endgame? Cam mentions endgame in his video. What is the endgame? And for him, in his video, he seems to say that his own endgame would be, ideally, that his writing brings in enough money so that it can be his job. So he's not asking for, a 200-foot yacht off the Antilles. He wants just that. And I want to, along those lines, I want to sort of clarify that there are three end games for writing, three possible end games. And for the purposes of this discussion, they oversimplify just a bit. For the purposes of this discussion, let's call them amateur, professional, and pro-am, so semi-pro. So at the amateur level, you are writing because you enjoy it. You're writing only for you. You're writing whatever you feel like, whenever you feel like it. It's not even necessarily for any kind of consumption, and certainly not for the rigor of improvement. You're not pruning your prose. You're doing it because it's fun. That's a response on its own. That's a whole other video. Cam opens his own video by saying that writing is hard. Writing is most certainly not hard. Writing is easy. All the rest of it is hard. But writing is easy. And it's also fun. If you don't do it, you should. And I strongly advise you at least to enter in on the amateur endgame. Just write when you feel like it. Write whatever you like, whenever you feel like it. You won't know if you have a calling for anything more than that until you at least do that. Then in the middle, the second endgame is semi-pro, where you write privately still, but it's for the enjoyment of you and maybe your friends, maybe a writing group, or just a group of people, a group of friends that you circulate your work to samizdat style. You're writing for them. So it's a little bit more than purely amateurish. You, in a circumstance like that, once you have an audience, you will want to improve. Even if they don't ask you to improve, you'll still want to do it, which is why I strongly advise you all to write for an audience. Nothing wrong with writing purely amateurish, so purely for yourself. In fact, I want to stress over and over again in this response video that all three of the endgames that I'm going to talk about are equally valid. All three of them are equally valid. No one is better than another. No one is more real than another. And anyone who tells you that is a ponce. They're a moron. You should disregard their opinion. Anyone who tells you that is wrong. All three of these levels are equally valid. So there's the amateur level, where you write fiction whenever the mood strikes you and it's only for you and you wouldn't show it to anybody else. Then there's this semi-pro level, where you're writing for yourself and an audience of people who aren't you. They might be friends of yours. They'll be favorably inclined towards your fiction. But it won't be just for you anymore. And I want to stress that with that semi-pro level includes a lot of published authors, a lot of mid-list authors, a lot of them. They might have the book contract. You might be able to dig around in a bookstore and find one of their paperbacks, but they are essentially doing that. They are essentially writing for a discrete circle of readers. And there's only a very discrete urge to ever be better, or to push the envelope, or to upset or surprise those readers. That very much includes published authors. There are plenty of published authors who write like that. And then there's the third endgame, and that is pro. That is where you want to be a professional writer. You want it to be the only thing you do. You want it to pay for your health insurance and your kids' health insurance. You want it to pay for your house and your car. And the thing that I want to stress about that pro level is that it's the Olympics. It's the Olympics. And if you think it's not, you're fooling yourself. You have to think about it that way, because that's what it is. That is the Olympics. So let's talk about it in terms of, I don't know, the 100-yard dash for the actual Olympics. You're a normal schlub of a person. You keep yourself in fairly good shape. You eat fairly well. When pushed, when called upon, you could do a 100-yard dash. It wouldn't set the world on fire. It wouldn't come anywhere close to any kind of a record, but you could do one. And then you stop and you'd be really winded and your legs would hurt and you would laugh about it with your friends. That's the amateur level. Then the semi-pro is where you have worked at the track, maybe with a coach, maybe with a time clock, and you have done a 100-yard dash and you're pretty good at it. And then there's the Olympics, the fastest 100-yard dashes in the world and in the history of the world. That third level is going pro. And the point I want to make about those different levels, I want to make 2 points. One is the one I said already. I want to repeat it over and over again because nobody gets it. A lot of people who are outside the writing world don't get it, and way too many people inside the writing world don't get it, which is that all three of those endgames are equally legitimate. They are equally valid. I would maybe myself personally resist you calling yourself a writer if all you do is dabble privately. I myself think that you can't be a writer unless you have an audience, but I would think that, right? Since I've had an audience for 50 years, I would think that. One way or the other, they're all equally valid. And the other point that I want to make about them is a little bit delicate, and it goes towards some of the points that Cam makes in his video that we will get to, which is that you don't graduate from one to the other of those magically. You don't change from one end game to the other by happenstance. Or just it'll happen one day. That doesn't happen, right? Think about the running analogy. It doesn't happen that you fall out of bed and are Olympic level at the 100-yard dash. That doesn't happen. Instead, if you want to get to the intermediate level of being good enough to be at a track or a local meet or whatnot, that takes a huge amount of practice. And getting to the Olympic level means committing your entire life to it. Every aspect, every moment, every thought of your entire life to getting there. Think about that analogy and you won't go wrong. You might think, well, when it comes to Olympics, yes, you could devote your whole life to it, but you could still fail. There are still elements of, nutrition, biology, genetics. Those have their equivalents in what I'm talking about here, because you can be as talented as you want, you can be as dedicated as you want to your writing. Sometimes it really does boil down to who you know, or to a lucky break. So those would be the equivalent of genetics. But the point I'm trying to make is that you'll never get from one to the other by accident or just by patiently waiting in your room. They represent different levels of commitment, and those are conscious choices. So those are the three end games. And with three end games, there are three paths, right? They all have their own path. One of those paths is to write whenever you feel like it. Just dabble, whatever material comes to hand, at whatever length comes to hand, just because you find it fun. The second is a little bit less dabbling, and it's a little bit more investment, and it encompasses a large number of self-published authors. And that is where you suddenly want an audience, where you're suddenly talking about an audience. And if you are a self-published author, well, that's everything. Well, those of you who are self-published authors, Cam is a self-published author himself. You know that's everything. You do everything yourself. No one does anything for you. And if that is the part of the semi-pro that we're talking about, not just circulating your work to friends, but circulating to an audience of people you don't know, well, then maybe your cousin writes self-help books, or did in the 60s, and maybe you have a little bit of an in for an agent, to maybe get an agent to represent your stuff. Still don't have astronomical goals. You're still saying to people, I'm no Solzhenitsyn. I'm writing basically for a small audience. Maybe you're writing a series of murder mysteries, or some do-it-yourself books, or whatever. Or you're self-publishing, and you've saved up enough money to put in the stake that you need for an editor and a cover artist, and then you're going to do the rest of it, right? Once you've got the book, then you're going to hustle. You're going to market it. You're going to flog it all around. You're going to get the word out, because you don't have a traditional publisher to do that for you. And that's the second path. And then the third path is the Olympics, is the pro path. And that is the same as the Olympics. You have to absolutely live it. You have to pound on your manuscript. It has to be not just perfect. It has to be not just good enough for your friends. It has to be perfect. It has to be something that can sustain an enormous amount of brutal scrutiny. You have to grow a hide in order to take that scrutiny. All of that is, it's not that those things may or may not happen if you want to go pro. They will happen. Your book will become your whole life. You will have a publicity tour with a publisher if pandemics allow, which means you will be on the road, away from your pets, away from your family for a long period of time. You'll be giving events with maybe 2 people, maybe 200 people, maybe 2,000 people. And that will be your life. You can't be an author and say no to those things. It will also mean you set up an author social media account, or a suite of them, and watch your P's and Q's so that you don't get canceled on social media. It will become your entire life, and you will reap the benefits. You will be known as an author. Your name will be known. Your income will almost certainly be assured. Those are the 3 paths to those 3 ends. And the point that I want to make is that the path determines the end game. You have to be clear-eyed about that, or it won't work. If you haven't sat down and had a conversation with yourself about what your end game is, then you'll never reach it. And you'll never reach it. It won't happen by accident. You have to sit down and say, what do I want out of writing? So Cam's question is, wanting a writing career enough? The answer is manifestly no. If you want a writing career, you have a lot more thinking to do than that. If you don't want a writing career, that's just fine. Then write. And that also applies to the semi-pro, where you're not just dabbling privately anymore, but you don't want the world. You have an idea for a book. You're willing to put up some money for an editor and a cover artist, make a book of your own. Plenty of your friends will buy it and read it, but plenty of strangers will too. It'll be very small stakes, but it will be real. And then there's pro. There's the pro world, which will not happen to you accidentally. You have to dedicate every fiber of your being to that world, to achieving that goal. That has to be your path. But if you don't sit down first and determine these things, how do you expect any of it to work? You have to sit down and ask yourself in complete honesty, what do I want and what am I willing to do to get there? Otherwise, you will be working at cross purposes to yourself for most of this time. And I hear some of you saying, some of you bloodthirsty little wombats are saying, wait a minute, didn't you at the beginning of this video promise us a little cam slapping? And of course, what would a response video be without a little slapping of the original videographer? Especially since in this case, without really intending to, of course, I don't mean the slapping to be in any way invidious, but Cam does say a few things in his videos that pricked up my ears. I wrote some of them down. He writes, right after he says that writing is hard, he says, I want to be writing all the things that he's working on, but I'm just ... not. And the big question in the video, as he says, is wanting a writing career enough? There seems almost to be an implication there that he sometimes only wants it and doesn't work towards it. Now, I know he's a pretty hard-working, self-published author, but look at the things that he admits in his video. He's a self-published author. He admits in his video, he acknowledges the absolute truth, which is that if you're a self-published novelist, hustling, marketing is everything. It's what determines whether or not you will make money off the endeavor or not. It alone does, not the quality of your work. I'd like to think that would be true, but it's not. Look at the 1,000 Amazon success stories. People who self-publish their books, and their books are available through Amazon. Look at the success stories. You see patterns develop pretty quick. These are people who are always working, and they have dozens of books in the Amazon marketplace. They have dozens of self-published books, and they're always working on more. And there are always giveaways and group discussions and interviews and deals on their books and tons of social media engagement, tons of flogging and marketing. And in his video, Cam, my good buddy Cam, admits that he doesn't do any of that. So in the video where he is at one hand saying, it's kind of frustrating that I'm not able to swap out my satisfying but creatively unfulfilling daytime job for a career as a writer. He seems a little bit down when he talks about the fact that he can't make that substitution. But what does he say on the other half of the video? That he knew perfectly well what his end game was and is not willing to follow the path of it. The path determines the end game. He's not willing to do that yet, anyway. He's not willing to do the key ingredient that would make that end game possible. And in fact, I know for a fact that a lot of his listeners are in the same boat, where they have an end game, but they aren't willing to do the path. They aren't willing to do the path that the end game dictates. And it works even with the very first goal, which is just to write privately for yourself. I would say, just for my own view of the subject, I would say that you aren't following the path of that end game if that's all you do, but you still want people to call you a writer. I'd say that there's a disconnect there as well. But the main place where I see this disconnect is people on the semi-pro and the pro level. People saying, I'd really like to be a household name. I'd really like to write for a living and have the money coming in. But what do you do? What do you do along those lines? Virtually nothing. In this video, Cam not only says that he puts no effort at all into marketing his books, and if he didn't say that, I would still know it. If he hadn't said it, I would have accused him of it, because I would know if he did. You would know if he did. There's a copy of his book behind him in his video. Where do you ever see mention of that book otherwise? The author has to mention it. The author has to do that. If that's the path you've chosen, if that's the end game you want, then the author has to do that, and he doesn't. And I think it's pretty easy to infer from his video. I could be wrong. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think it's pretty easy to infer from his video that he has chunks of free time that do not go to writing. I'd be amazed if he denied that. And I don't mean to pick on Cam here, because a great number of you, especially out there in the wilds of AuthorTube, are in the exact same boat, where you've got to work. You've got a work in progress, and you don't work on it. You've got a book that needs revising, but you don't revise it. You've got a book that needs revising, sure, but there's a brand new, very hot, talked about on social media video game that requires 4 hours a day. And it just so happens that what with your job and your other responsibilities, 4 hours a day is about all the time you have. Well, okay then. All right. But keep in mind, the path determines the end game. So if you are taking the path of the first end game, which is just to dabble in writing privately without any weight on it at all, with no expectations whatsoever, if you're taking that path, that will be your end game. I'm not saying that the end, as Cam points out in his video, working nonstop, just busting your butt 24 hours a day, doesn't guarantee that you will get the pro status, doesn't guarantee that you will go to the Olympics, but it's the only way that you will. You won't do it any other way. It doesn't happen by magic. It doesn't happen that you're beetling along on the semi-pro level, and then somebody says, hey, would you like to be a household name? That happens only through work. An inordinate, enormous amount of work. And you will know whether or not that's your end game by whether or not that's the path you're on. It's as simple as that. It's fairly heartbreaking, especially since it's a little bit harsh. And again, I'm not picking on Cam. Well, I am a little, because it's fun to pick on people, but also I'm mainly aiming this at the wide rank and file of AuthorTube, who I think it applies equally to. When's the last time that you wrote for an hour? When's the last week where you wrote every day? How much progress are you making on this thing when no one's making you make progress on this thing? That will determine your end game. That will determine what happens. Cam is a good writer, and he has a good design sense, very good personal skills, and a fairly good platform on his BookTube channel. Therefore, using him as an example only, I am not meaning to pick on him, using him as an example only, if he wants, he's already said what his end game is. The end game that he wants is that this be his source of income. His only source of income, that he be able to quit his job, is the phrase, the tossed off phrase that writers and AuthorTube all over the world, that's what they say. They say the gold standard is I'd like to quit my job. Okay, all right, well that's an end game. Is that the path? It doesn't look it to me. And not just with Cam, but I watch a lot of AuthorTube channels and I don't see it. 90% of them, I don't see it. I see lots of dabbling. I see lots of the first kind of writing, totally amateur, the totally amateur kind of writing, where you dabble from time to time, but you want people to call you a writer. And that's my response to, is wanting a writing career enough? Wanting to write is plenty. Yeah. And writing privately in the first end game is plenty. It's totally valid. I would love to hear about it. But career? A career means that you don't do anything else. It's not a side hustle anymore. It means it's your source of income. And wanting a writing career is clearly not enough. It is clearly not enough. You have to work towards it. Your path determines your end game. Anyway, I want to just wrap that up. That is my response to Cam's video. And not just to the specifics of his video. I think if you look at the specifics of his video, you see someone who wants something that he's not working towards. Which raises questions. For me, it raises questions. I don't mean it to sound harsh, but Cam states his end game in this video. And he also states that he is not working towards it. Not maybe 10% of the 100% that he needs to be doing to work towards that end game. And that's not even talking about pro, right? We're talking about just the semi-pro level is what he wants, where he makes enough of a living off self-publishing so that he can quit his job. We're not talking about pro, or I would be asking, when's the last time he worked up a presentation to pitch to an agent? He's got a self-published book, looks really good. We're not talking pro because he didn't say that he wanted pro. The end game that he stated is, I think, the end game that he shares with a lot of AuthorTube. which is to basically be able to quit his job and make a living, not to become a household name, not to have 2 yachts, but to make a living. Well, okay, he stated that end goal, but he also stated his work habits, and they don't describe the path towards that end goal. That always confuses me. When I see that, and I see that a lot, that always confuses me. So I wanted to put that in there in rules of 3. There are 3 end games here, and there are 3 paths. If your path isn't aligned with your end game, you're not going to have success until it is. It's as simple as that, I think. So feel free to let me know, and I will leave a link to poor abused Cam. I meant it to use him only as an example of broader AuthorTube. I think broader AuthorTube is responding to his video because he struck a lot of common notes, and I've been a passionate, committed observer from the outside of a lot of those struggles. I've helped many, many a writer get through those struggles, mainly by doing what I think all AuthorTube people listening need to do, which is sit down and have a long conversation with yourself about which of those end games you want. Not only which one you want, but which one you're willing to work towards. Which one aligns with the path you are willing to take. If you don't have that conversation, I don't know how you expect it to work. It's the same thing as with our running analogy. No one listening to me, none of you would say, well, I really want to, I'm 16, I really want to place in the Olympics at the 100-yard dash. So I'm going to dabble once every week, one weekend every month or so, and that ought to do it. None of you would think that. None of you would. All I'm asking is that you apply that yardstick to this. This is just a profession like anything else. There's nothing mystical about it, especially there are no fairy godmothers. No one is going to give you the pro when you're at the semi-pro. No one is going to do that. You have to do that. Are you willing? Are you willing to take that path? When you roll out of bed and you think about the 100-yard dash in the Olympics, what are you willing to do? If you have to have a conversation with yourself. Now, when it comes to the 100-yard dash in the Olympics, that conversation is not hard to have, except for a tiny fraction of people, none of whom are on BookTube. That conversation is not hard to have. You can roll out of bed and think, well, 100-yard dash in the Olympics, okay, well, I'm not even going to approach it, so I'll stay in good shape. And maybe I'll try a 100-yard dash just for the fun of it in front of my friends. Or you could roll out of bed and say, I would like to get pretty good at that. I would like to start racking up some pretty good numbers on the amateur level, on the non-professional level. So I will work at it. And I know just what that needs to be. I need to put in time every day. I need to study it. I need to learn what I need to do. I need to intentionally choose that path. And then out there in the world, there are people who roll out of bed and say, I want to go to the Olympics in the 100-yard dash. And they know what they need to do, and it's a hell of a lot more than the second group, and a world away from the first group. The same thing is true with any creative endeavor, or any endeavor of any kind. I would say any structured endeavor. You have to decide what path you want. What path is congruent with what end goal? So that's my advice, totally unsolicited. I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube and AuthorTube.